Hello and welcome back. I'm Nicole, a cottage witch, and today I'm doing a VR to Brian Cormack Carr. It's the Tarot 5Ws hashtag, which I will also be doing for books, as I do, because I'm me and that's how it goes. So the first prompt is who, and he's got a list of questions that you can answer for each one. You don't have to answer all of them. You can, or you can just pick which one you want to answer. So it's things like who first turns you on to tarot, who's your favorite tarot author, who's your favorite decorator, who's your favorite tarot character, etc. So the people on YouTube who were probably, I think, the first YouTubers that I watched to do with tarot were Katie Flowers, when she was still doing YouTube videos. Well, she still does YouTube videos for books, but not for tarot anymore. Although I think her channel is still up. And I've got the spread cards mixed in there. And I really, really loved her. I still watch her book YouTube channel, booktube channel. It's a lot of fun. And I find she always has interesting, insightful things to say, and I appreciate her perspective. And I appreciated that perspective when I was first getting started with tarot. This was a few years ago now. The other person who I watched a lot of, and still do, but was one of the first people that I watched a lot of, was Lisa Pepez. And her videos are just a lot of fun. And so they remind me to have fun with tarot, and not to try and take it too seriously all the time, maybe. And be more, I think she was one who had the intuitive tarot hashtag a while back. And intuition, growing up in a fundamentalist community, intuition is something that you're not allowed to trust. And so it's been a bit of a job to try and get that back after it was sort of stomped down for so many years. So I appreciate her channel for that sort of thing. My favorite deck creator is this one, well, artist, because this was made by two people. But the art is by Mari in the Sky, who did the Gentle Tarot as well, and is now working on an oracle to go with it. And I just adore her artwork. It is very gentle. It's very sweet, but that doesn't mean that it's lacking in depth, which I appreciate. And I also am interested in supporting Indigenous artists and in decolonizing how we look at the tarot and many other things. So her work is just very interesting to me. Now for books, who turned me onto books? Well, my mom used to read books like Narnia outside the bedroom door at night, and I always loved that. She always read to us as kids, and that's, I mean, people do know that that's a big indicator of whether somebody's going to turn into a reader themselves one day. And other books I read growing up were just sort of like fun adventure ones, or Nancy Drew, or Island of Blue Dolphins, that sort of thing. But people who were important in my sort of development journey in reading were people like Beatrice, what's her last name? Mosionier? It's different. This is her old last name, but she goes by a different last name now. I think it's Mosionier. At any rate, this was the first book by an Indigenous author that I'd ever read, and it's the story of two twin girls, one who looks Métis. I mean, they're both Métis, but one looks Métis and the other can pass for white. And it's a story of how they get treated very, very differently in the world. And it's the first time I'd ever read a story like that. I think it was the first time I'd ever read a story by an author who wasn't white, which is ridiculous that it took till high school to get to that stage, but that was the Canadian education system for you there for a while. I think it's improving, but probably not enough. Anyway, that was amazing, and we had some really good class discussions about this one. There is a edited for school version that's just called April Raintree because there is rape and other sorts of violence, I think, if I recall correctly, in this book. So it's not a pretty picture of this girl's life. A couple of the other authors who showed me what literature could be, or what books could be, are people like Isabel Allende, who is known for magical realism. And it was just a style of writing that I had never read. I'd never really read outside Canada much, I think, at this point. This was like 20 years ago, so I've read quite a lot more widely since then. She was certainly the first South American author I'd ever read, and probably one of the first women in translation I'd ever read. And I've read, I think, every single one of her books except the most recent one, which is on my bookshelf, and I've been very delinquent about that. I don't know why. I just have. But I enjoy magical realism. I enjoy the like what seems like an ordinary family life in an ordinary old family house that turns out to be a little extra. Just a little bit magic in life. I enjoy that. And so yeah, I love her books. Also important to me was Toni Morrison. I've read all of her books and a lot of her essays. And she was the first Black woman I think I ever read. And I don't think there should be an American on earth who hasn't read her books. They're essential reading. And she was also the first author I read who specifically said that she didn't write for a white audience. She wrote for a Black audience in the US. And I thought that was really interesting. I'd never heard anybody talk about that sort of thing before. I suppose previously, probably in publishing, you pretty well had to write for a white audience in mind, because that was everybody in publishing, and largely still is, as I understand it. And so it was a bit of a shift in my perspective to hear her talk about that. And it was also, it is a book that explicitly centers Black characters in America, in Black communities, with their specific histories and life stories and everything. And if there are any white characters, they tend to be incidental or the cause of problems, which, I mean, is probably not unrealistic in a lot of Black Americans' experiences. So it was really interesting reading her books, and they're really well written. They're beautifully written books, and her essays are fascinating too. I always appreciated her essays because they kind of forced me to think about things in ways that I hadn't maybe considered before. And this is the last of the early days books in my reading journey. This is Empire of the Mind, A History of Iran by Michael Axworthy. And it is one of the most fascinating history books I've ever read. It's amazing. Well, maybe I'll get into this in the why. But basically, there was a time where I started to be more intentional about trying to expand my point of view, and expand it outside of just my community, which was still quite limited to, fairly conservative Christian white middle class Canada, which is a limited and limiting point of view if you never meet anybody or get to know anybody outside of that who has different experiences. And there are so many other possible ways of living in the world beyond just that. So this was one of the first books that I read when I first started to try to imagine the world from other people's points of view. I think I'll leave it at that for the who, and maybe get into more with the why later. Okay, so the second prompt is what, and you can answer questions like, what do you love most about tarot? What's your currently most used deck? What's your favorite tarot tool or technique? And kind of what I love most about tarot is the way it can help me see things from a different point of view, which is also what I love most about reading. For me, reading has really expanded my view of the world because I was raised in a community that was intentionally closed off to the world. There was so much I was ignorant of, and I didn't, for a few years there, didn't even realize the extent of that ignorance. So it's quite a process getting out of that environment and then learning, not just learning all the things you need to know, but learning all the things you don't know, because it's a long list. And so what I appreciate books for are for expanding my mind. And this can be histories like Empire of the Mind or nonfiction, or they can be fiction even, to expand my view of what's possible in the world and the different possible ways of living in it. And as I said, there are so very many ways of living in it, and most of those ways are not mine, but that doesn't make them wrong. And that's sort of the opposite of what I grew up learning, which was very much that everybody that doesn't do things exactly our way is wrong and going to hell, and etc. It was all very dramatic. So that's what I appreciate a reading for. But it's also what I appreciate tarot for, because sometimes if you have a question or just want something to think about on any given day, sometimes I'll just ask, what should I focus on today? Or how can I think about X, Y, and Z differently? And it's lovely to get a different perspective, or to sort of is that the word I'm looking for? It may not be. Certain things in my brain to sort of inspire a different train of thought that I may not have ended up on otherwise. So that's the what for what do you love most about tarot, and also what do you love most about books. The decks I'm showing are also some of the decks that I love most, so that's also sort of part of the what. This is the Song of the Grandmothers Oracle by Kara Simmons and Murray in the Sky, and it's an all-time favorite. Okay, number 3 is when. So when did you first encounter tarot? When did you first start to take tarot seriously? When did you have your last significant tarot experience, etc.? So I've only been using tarot for, seriously, since about probably the pandemic-ish, maybe a little bit before that, but not a lot before that. And so that's, about 3 years, or 3 or 4 years at this point. And when did I start taking it seriously? Probably 2 or 3 years ago was the first time I actually started to read books about it, and try and study it. Before that, I was just like, oh, it's so pretty and fun. And there's nothing wrong with that, and I still do that sometimes. But a few years ago, I did want to start learning more about different traditions and that sort of thing. So that's the when. The when for reading. And this is the Herbcrafter's tarot that I've got here. The when for reading is forever. I've always been a reader. Since I was a little kid, I've been reading. I've always been at the library. The library was what saved me from religious extremism, basically. And so I've always loved the library, and I've always had my nose in a book. But when I started to use it as a way to explore the world more, also ties into the why, which is why do you love tarot? Why do you continue to study it? That sort of thing. So I'll expand on that then maybe, but one of the whys is for learning different points of view, or one of the whens. When? Yeah. What was the question? I've lost my train of thought. What do you use it for? Yeah, I use it mostly for learning other points of view. And also, in the case of this deck, and one that I've made for myself and a couple of others, learning herbalism is another thing that I use tarot for. And also books, because honestly, you can learn all sorts of things. I mean, there's also like YouTube and ChatGPT and everything these days, which are, you can learn just about anything you set your mind to. At the moment, it seems, but I've always loved books for that. Okay, moving not so swiftly along. Number 4 is where. Where were you when you did your first serious reading? Where did you carry out readings and tarot practices? Where do you store your decks, etc.? And my answer for that is just at home. I only do tarot at home. I know too many people who wouldn't like it. Also, I live in a sort of, well, I don't want to say Alberta's conservative because it's not a monolith. And people sometimes think it is, and then that gets frustrating in its own way. But our current leader is a bit bananas. And there are definitely some strains, I guess, of Albertan society that are still very conservative, religious, etc. I mean, you know, be conservative if you like, but then let other people be whatever they want to be. And there are just too many people around me that don't think that way and want everybody to be the way they want them to be. And so I don't tend to take tarot out and about because too many of the people that I know wouldn't like it. Books, though, go everywhere with me. I've got a book. I mean, I've always got audiobooks on my phone, so there's that. But I tend to have an actual book everywhere. Like, I've got books at work. I've got over 1,000 books at home. I've got, several audiobooks at work on my phone, and several books at work. And then I take books everywhere. Like, if I go to appointments or anything, like, basically, the only places I don't take books are the grocery store. But if there's any chance of me having to wait any length of time, I am taking a book. So when I go to the airport, for example, I will have several books. I mean, more than you can reasonably be expected to read while you're waiting for your plane. I will have that many books. Okay, carrying on after I was so rudely interrupted by my phone telling me I was getting low on storage space. Basically, the last question now is why? Why do you love tarot? Why do you continue to study tarot? Why do you think it's important and or helpful, etc.? So usually I do it just for fun. Well, usually. Often. And as other people have said, it's like having 78 little pieces of art in a deck, which is incredible. I mean, some of these artists are just so astonishingly talented. It blows my mind a little bit. So I enjoy that just for that. But I also appreciate the chance to consider things differently, like if I'm stuck on a problem. I don't tend to use tarot for a lot of things, but if I need to maybe shake things up a bit and get out of a rut or think of things from a different angle to try and solve something, then I'll use it, and it's good for that, and I enjoy that. And books, it's very much the same. I use them, as I've said, for expanding my view of the world, learning different points of view. I'd started to read about the Middle East in the lead up to the American war in Iraq, and because what I was watching on the news just seemed like the way Iraqi people were depicted on the news seemed so unrealistic. They seemed like they were all the same cardboard cutout of people. And as somebody who grew up in a community that was trying to be a monolith, I thought that seems unreasonable for one of the oldest civilizations on Earth with millions of people. And of course it was unreasonable. It's much more complicated than that and much more interesting than that. And so that started off the why, and it sort of continues to be the why. One of the other whys, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this, is to escape reality sometimes into imaginary worlds, because frankly, reality is sometimes a nightmare. Sometimes the world is incredible. Sometimes it's horrifying. And so sometimes, you know, taking an hour to escape for yourself, to give your mind a chance to rest and reset, is not a bad thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so that's my why. So those are my responses to the Tarot 5Ws, to which I added the book 5Ws, because of course I did. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.